Good evening and welcome to Behind the Headlines. Today is Wednesday, the 28th of October, 2020. And in this programme tonight, we'll be discussing the US presidential election and asking what is at stake. In less than a week, the American people will go to the polls, and many have actually voted already to decide whether President Trump wins a second term as American president, or Joe Biden, the Democratic presidential candidate, wins and takes the White House. And this is so important, not only for Christians in America, but for Christians throughout the world, because freedom is at stake. So to join me in tonight's programme, I'm joined by my good friend Stephen Briggs, and on the phone, by video link, we also have Gary Lane from CBN. Stephen, we are probably talking about one of the most important and crucial US presidential elections in recent history. Why is this election so important?
Because the freedom of the Western world hangs in the balance, essentially. What he stands for and what he's done and how he's operated in the Middle East in this previous term is crucial to how the Western world shapes up for the next 4 years.
Absolutely. And also, I think we have to mention the fact that we are live, we are interactive. So why does the US presidential election matter to you and matter for Christians? So please feel free to text or email into the programme. Stephen, one thing that concerns me really, if we see the presidential election only through the eyes of our mainstream secular media, then we will have a very kind of distorted view of reality of what's happening, not only in this election, but on President Trump and himself. I mean, I remember it was George W. Bush had a horrendous time in terms of media attacks on his presidency. But it seems like the attacks on President Trump are unprecedented. This is a new level of attack and hostility. Why do you think that this president is so hated when he really does stand for Christian values and biblical values? So certainly his administration does.
Well, I think there's a progressive humanistic agenda that is enveloping the world as people have removed their moral compass and have taken a position whereby they want to every man wants to do what's right in his own eyes. We have a situation in front of us where actually when there is something that tells us there's a moral right and a moral wrong, there is a conflict that happens, and what we're seeing within this election is actually what he has stood for and carried out in keeping his word when he said, I'm going to do this, and carrying it out. Actually, the world doesn't necessarily like that anymore. They want to see somebody in the ground that we have to remember, politicians blow with the wind. Depending on which way the wind is blowing affects what they say and what they do. We see that in our own country. And so for him to have a compass that he says, I'm going to do this, whether you like it or not, because I see it's going to be good for the world and good for my country, that flies in the face of the liberalists, and they don't like it.
And also we see that President Trump has actually very much welcomed prayer. He spoke very powerfully at the National Prayer Breakfast that takes place every year, praying for the president, praying for his government. We also see that he's allowed so many evangelicals into the White House to pray and intercede for himself and his administration. We see that he's appointed very strong evangelical Christians to very key positions of power and influence. I mean, you only have to look at Mike Pence, the vice president, Mike Pompeo, the US Secretary of State, and many others, including the former American ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, all very strong Bible-believing Christians. And if the media, mainstream media, is right in the way that they present him to be, and if he was and still is such a playboy, why would he want to surround himself with such strong evangelical Christians and actually call on the Lord and to actually allow and pray for America and recognize that above him is God and Jesus Christ?
Yeah, we have a situation whereby they don't like the fact that he was. We have to remember he was pro-choice. He was very much for abortion, and the progression of his life, he's now pro-life. And that in and of itself actually is something that our current society doesn't like. They don't like the idea that you can change from one position to another. We see us being fed from Google, from the search engines, that if you have a certain viewpoint, you are fed that viewpoint. You are not permitted to change your viewpoint or to change your mind. And that has gone across all different sectors of society. You can't have somebody who's practiced a certain lifestyle change out of that lifestyle in a way that the liberal media says, oh, well, hang on a minute, you can't change. You've got to stay as you were. And so this outworking of change, and change being possible. Oh, nobody thought, oh, we can't engage with North Korea. Oh, we can't have an arrangement between the Arabs and the Israelis. I mean, all of these things that have happened have surprised the Western world and have surprised the mainstream media at large, and yet it shows that there is a possibility to transform things that didn't seem possible.
I have to ask you one question. I mean, many of our viewers might be thinking, I've done quite a lot of programs recently on the US presidential elections, but, you know, living here in Britain, what happens over the other side of the Atlantic, does it really matter? So my question to you really, Stephen, is does this presidential election really matter and have an impact on Christians living here in the UK?
Absolutely, it matters. What we're faced with in the UK is largely cognitive dissonance. People don't want to use their brains. They don't want to think. Christians don't use their brains to think very often. They just accept what is there. They've taken their worldview from the media rather than what the Bible says. The Bible says very clearly, woe to those that call good evil, evil good rather than good evil. This is a real scenario that we face that is enveloping inside the church, let alone outside of it. And so the very fact that there is somebody taking up a stand and saying, no, actually, let's do things in a way that is distinct and upholds values. And we have to remember Amy Coney Barrett being elected to the Supreme Court today. What a huge result that is, that could open up the door potentially to even Roe versus Wade being overturned, which 1973, which paved the way for abortion to cover not only America, but the whole world. And yet we now have the Supreme Court weighed 6-3 in a conservative setup.
Incredible. And we now have an excellent video to show you. We're big fans at Revelation TV of CBN, and this is Gary Lane's own program called Global Lane, as we'll be interviewing shortly via video link.
Today from the Global Lane, internet freedom in decline. Governments worldwide using the COVID-19 pandemic for mass surveillance.
China ranks worst of the worst out of the 65 countries we cover.
Cash payment program in Compton. And Trump's Platinum Plan. Which approach will win over black voters on Election Day? Vindication for a Michigan barber who defied his governor. And illegal shutdown actions.
I challenge those guys. They're cowards. You know, they won't stand on the side of what's true and right.
Hunter Biden, alleged family bagman? A look at who is really in the bag for Joe. And it's all right here on the Global Lane. Some Democrats are elated that Joe Biden has chosen California Senator Kamala Harris as his running mate. Others aren't too pleased. Well, back with us to set us straight is Vince Everett Ellison. He's author of the book, The Iron Triangle, inside the liberal Democratic plan to use race to divide Christians and Americans in their quest for power and how we can defeat them. Vince, good to see you. So tell me, some Democrats refer to Harris as a female Obama, yet many from the party's left wing, their base, are unhappy with this pick. Why?
Well, I don't know why they wouldn't be happy. I mean, Kamala Harris has shown them, you know, how to do the thing that they want to do the most, and that is get the votes and make a state a socialist bastion. I mean, she got promoted because, you know, being a black Democrat, she did what black Democrats do, and that is keep black people down. The black unemployment rate is, you know, the lowest it's highest in the country. Black education, worst schools in the country. The cities are burning. They abort half the babies. They destroyed the black family, but they get 90% of the black vote, and that's all that matters. And Kamala Harris has told Joe Biden, if you make me VP, I'll show you how to do it in the rest of the country. So look out, America. If you love the inner cities of Chicago, you love LA and San Francisco, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are going to bring it right to your doorstep, and that's what they want.
And Vince, former San Francisco Mayor Willie Brown had urged Biden not to choose Harris. Why would he not want his former girlfriend to run for vice president?
Probably because he knows her very, very well. They put Joe in a box, and when these 100 black liberal men came out and told him that if you don't pick a black woman, we're going to destroy your candidacy, he didn't have any choice but to do it. But it's amazing that this party that always claims that you should use race or gender bias to make decisions, use race and gender bias to make this decision. And the thing, and it's amazing because what they actually did was they broke federal law. They excluded white men, white people from even being considered for the job. But the Democrats, of course, never cared much about the law. They systematically disobeyed the 14th, 15th, and 13th Amendment for 100 years between 1865 and 1965. So this is nothing new for them.
Is this going to help or hurt Biden with blacks and others this fall?
It's going to hurt him much more than he thinks it'll help him. Most black men are not going to forget that Kamala Harris spent most of her career locking black men up for crimes she herself committed. She admitted to smoking marijuana and was locking up black men for it. She has never been a person that considered herself a friend to the black community. She has always been concerned about one person, and that's Kamala Harris. And if she can lock up black men and get promoted, she'll do it. If she can keep the black community down and get promoted, she'll do it. She's just like the rest of the Iron Triangle. They know that if they help the Democratic Party get reelected, it helps them, and that's all they're concerned about.
Okay, Vince Everett Ellison, thank you for setting us straight today, Vince. Good to see you.
Thank you.
And we now have the man himself, Gary Lane, all the way from Virginia Beach in the United States to discuss how critical this year's US presidential elections are and why it matters to Christians. Great to see you, Gary, and you do a fantastic job at CBN, and we really appreciate all the truth that you bring us and educating us Christians, not only here in Britain, but around the world, because we can't really rely on any other media network to tell the truth about what's happening, not only regarding the United States, but other major news issues around the world. So can we all thank you for the wonderful work that you do and the team do at CBN?
Well, I'd like to thank Revelation TV for bringing those stories and reports to the people of the UK. I think it's very important for our cousins, our family members across the pond, shall I say, get this information, because I don't think you're getting it anywhere in the UK.
No, that's very true. Our media, mainstream media, is very distorted when it comes to presenting news and information, particularly on Trump, which is always 99% negative. Before we go into the discussion on the US elections, Gary, can you tell us this amazing story that you told us before, that this year is the 400th anniversary when the Mayflower set sail from Plymouth and these shores to the New World, and that you have a relative that was on board the ship?
Yes, I have an ancestor. His name was Thomas Rogers, and he was on the Mayflower, signed the Mayflower Compact. My grandmother, when she was living, always told me that I had an ancestor that came on the Mayflower. And I said, sure, Grandma, what was his name? And she could never tell me the name or any details. But that's the great thing about Ancestry.com and various sites like that. I sent in my DNA, and they did the analysis and came back, and I did a little research and found out his name, Thomas Rogers. He died that first winter here in the United States. Well, it wasn't the United States then, but the colony, American colony, Plymouth. And he, as did about half of the pilgrims, perished that first winter. A very harsh winter. They were malnourished from that long trip, and very little food to eat, of course. So many of them got sick and died. He was one of them, but fortunately, his children survived, and his daughter, Elizabeth, was my grandmother many times removed. But so that's the story. But I think the significance of that, Simon, is, you know, in the U.S. right now, we have this 1619 project that is sponsored by the New York Times, and it's rewriting American history. It's teaching young people here in America and others that America is all about slavery. It was founded on slavery in 1619 when the first slaves arrived. And I take issue with that because I know that my ancestor, Thomas Rogers, and the other pilgrims, the Puritans who came to New England, came for religious freedom. They wanted to be free. And that's what they fought for in various wars, our Revolutionary War. And then again, when it came time for the Civil War, the American Civil War, known as the War between the States, my ancestors and many others in the North battled to actually liberate Black people, African Americans, from slavery. So our country is not really based on that. They want to rewrite history, and it's really a shame that is being accepted in some institutions here and institutions of learning here in the United States.
Which we know when you end up rewriting history, it only sets a dangerous precedent. And that's the great concern for you in America, but also in the Western world as well. Gary, we see that the US presidential election is less than a week away, and it's been described as one of the most critical US presidential elections in America's history. As a journalist working on these stories, what is at stake for Christians and what is at stake for America in this crucial election that takes place on Tuesday, the 3rd of November?
Well, before I answer that, I just want to say that I'm a journalist. I've been working in broadcasting for 46 years now. I've covered a lot of elections. I actually worked on one presidential race with Pat Robertson when he ran for president in 1988. I was his press secretary at the time. Wow. But I can tell you, I have never, ever in my 46 years of covering news covered an election quite like this one. It is very unique. And I would say what is at stake? America is really at a crossroads right now. And that affects the whole world because, being the largest economy in the world and having a lot of influence and power that we project around the world with our military and economically, it has some consequences. So the people have a choice. Do they want to go the route of a more leftist, left-wing turn here where we embrace some aspects of socialism, or do we stay the course that is basically a capitalistic one of economic prosperity and individual liberty and freedom, or do we allow the government to have more control over our lives? So that is really the choice. Will it be Joe Biden, who really is close to some members of his party that have really taken a leftist turn? Some people say that he made a deal with the so-called devil, with Bernie Sanders, but actually his vice presidential candidate has a more liberal record in the U.S. Senate than Bernie Sanders. So which way are we going to go? It's a very pivotal and crucial election this time, Simon. I mean, they're all important, but this one especially so.
Gary, what's the feeling on the ground in America? How is the general populace feeling in regard to these elections? Because everything we see in the UK media is that Biden is polls ahead, miles ahead in the polls, and that Trump hasn't got a hope in coming through and winning this election. What is your assessment on the ground in the US?
Well, it's hard to gauge, Stephen, and I'll say the reason for that is this time we've had more people vote by mail, absentee ballots and mail voting than we have ever had. I think last check it was closing in on 70 million people. And I think last time around we didn't even hit 60 million. It was maybe 57 or 58 million voters voted by mail. So that is going to change this election big time because here's the problem with that. Fox News just recently did a study where they sent in some ballots around the country by mail, and they found out that some weren't even arriving. There are some that were out on the 26th of September that still have not arrived yet at their destination. Others were lost in the mail. They received notices that this address doesn't exist when in fact it did, and they'd received other ballots at the same address. Things like that happening, taking days to get across country and even within cities. And I think the lesson from that is, look, we have an election on November 3rd. That is a deadline. So your ballots have to be postmarked on November 3rd. Now, it varies in states on how many days after November 3rd they will continue to count those ballots, but most of them are like maybe up to 5 days or so. So what happens with tens of thousands, maybe even millions of ballots that come in after the deadline? those will be thrown out. So people's votes will not be counted. And that's really a shame. There are many people who say, hey, I want to change my vote. Can I go and change the vote that I already cast by mail? So there are many issues here. We found ballots in various cities around the country that have been just discovered in trash bins where mail personnel have dumped them. Others that have been found duplicates in mailboxes and so forth. So that's a whole different dynamic in this election. On the ground, I think you're seeing a lot of Trump voters excited. The president has had big turnouts at his rallies. I mean, 10,000 people, even more at some of his rallies, where then you see Joe Biden, when he does go out of the basement, he goes out and he speaks, and they've had social distancing and maybe just a handful of people that he's speaking to. Now, more recently, we saw a big drive-in rally that he had in Georgia. That was a good crowd there, but he hasn't been traveling much. And beyond that, I would say, Stephen, it has to do with what the campaigns are doing on the ground. The Democrats, I think, are making a big mistake this election year. They're putting a lot of money into ads and targeting certain districts. Like, for example, Pennsylvania, they may target an ad. In the recent debate, Trump got Biden to say that he would eventually phase out the oil industry and other fossil fuels in the United States. That doesn't play well in places like Pennsylvania, where they do a lot of fracking. They do a lot of oil there, places like Oklahoma, Texas, even in Ohio. So that isn't playing well with those voters. So what the Democrats are doing, they're targeting ads where Biden is denying that and so forth. In Pennsylvania, saying, no, that's not true. I don't support fracking, even though on camera, he said on many occasions that he did. So they're running ads, targeted ads, but they're not putting people on the ground. People are actually going door to door, knocking on doors, urging people to get out and vote, handing out literature. The Republicans and the Trump campaign are doing that. They've been doing that since late summer. And that will pay off in the end, I think, in many of these places that are swing states, some of these key districts that the president has to win. That can make a difference. You have to have people on the ground. You have to be doing the work on the ground. And then your candidate has to get out there. You can't shelter him. He's got to get out and talk, answer questions. Biden has only been doing that within the last couple of days. So we'll see how it goes. But that's a whole new dynamic in this election. And I think the Trump voters, very energetic. Not so much that I've seen with the Biden people.
Gary, I've just got a few of our emails coming through from our viewers, so I'm just going to read them out, so please stay with us. This one is from Jay, who wrote, Joe Biden clearly is not fit to lead the US. Have the American people grown weary of the drama around President Trump? I hope not. And then we got Cynthia writes, Dear Simon, I believe what Yemi said this morning on our mornings was correct. If President Trump is elected again, it will be God's mercy and he will give us more time. However, Joe Biden is elected, we'll be under the judgment of God. Thank you for a brilliant program as always. And that's from Cynthia. And I'll just read out this one. It says, Hi Simon, Trump is the best president in recent times and for his stance against abortion and his fantastic support for Israel. He has invited upon himself the wrath of Satan, who peddles his lies and deceit through his vile media. Anyway, no worries, Simon. Trumpy will win the election. Easy next week, not a problem. Great show as always. God bless from Jeff. I really pray and hope. I have to ask you, Gary, in terms of President Trump's Christian credentials and that of his administration, how Christian has this administration been in terms of giving access to Christians, setting foreign policy and also domestic policy on biblical values? How important is Christianity to the Trump administration?
Well, Simon, first I would say it's unprecedented. I have never seen, and I covered aspects of the Reagan White House, and he was a Christian man, and he was very receptive to having Christians in his administration and also inviting them to the White House, but nothing like this. I don't recall seeing on camera pastors gathered around the president and laying hands on him in the Oval Office and praying for him. And think about those that are in his cabinet that are Christian. I mean, Mike Pompeo, and I've interviewed Secretary of State Mike Pompeo on numerous occasions before he became Secretary of State when he was a congressman, and he's a devout Christian. Also, Mike Pence, the vice president of the United States. And these men surround the president and advise him. And you have others as well in the administration. Dr. Ben Carson, who's also the Housing and Urban Development Secretary. He's a devout Christian. These men have influence on policy-making decisions, and we've seen some of the fruit of that. On abortion, we've seen the president come down against Planned Parenthood. We've also seen him take the action internationally, denying funds internationally for abortion. We wish he could do more of that here in the United States, but it's very political here. But he's very much a pro-life president. Reagan spoke to the March for Life rally that happens every January here on the anniversary of Roe versus Wade here in Washington, D.C. Reagan did it by video, and he also, I think, did it by phone one year. I've never seen a president actually go before that group and speak in person, live. And President Trump did do that. So he is very much pro-life now. I know he wasn't years ago, but he is now. And today he says he's no longer a Presbyterian. He considers himself a non-denominational Christian. But in addition to that, let's look at some of the things that he has done regarding Israel. That's very important to evangelical Christians. He moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, the U.S. Embassy, and others have followed the U.S. lead on that. And I remember covering Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan pledged to do that, but it never happened. Other presidents have said they would do it. It never happened. Donald Trump did do that. And that's very significant because it's saying Jerusalem forever is the capital of the Jewish state. And we will not bend on that. The Jews won't bend on it. The United States will not bend on it. That's very significant. Then we can go on with other aspects of coming against the Palestinians and some of the things they were doing with money that U.S. taxpayers were sending them. But the most significant thing that's historic are these peace agreements. Of course, you have Kosovo and Serbia, but look at the Middle East. You have Bahrain, you have the United Arab Emirates, and now Sudan. That have come forward and say, we are making peace with Israel. We're going to have diplomatic relations with them and trade. That's historic. That's significant. Many people felt that the president deserved the Nobel Peace Prize for that. But of course, he did not get it. I guess you have to do nothing, basically, like Barack Obama did. He received it after 9 months in the presidency. He hadn't done anything for peace. And then the Nobel Committee said, well, we wanted to encourage him to work for peace. And so what did he do? He entered a peace agreement with Iran, which actually gave them $150 billion and then allowed them to further develop nuclear weapons. So anyway, yes, he has done a lot that Christians can applaud. And I said in my commentary today that will air tomorrow night on the Global Lane, I recorded it today, and basically I have had people say to me, well, how should I vote? And look, I'm not endorsing anyone. I'm not telling you how to vote. Are you an evangelical Christian? Yes. Okay. Then pro-life. Why do you support candidates who want to kill babies? Why are you doing that? Don't vote for someone who wants to kill a baby if you are against abortion. Same thing with Israel. Why would you support politicians who give money to groups and organizations and those who want to destroy Israel and work to that end? Why would you do that? Why would you support politicians who do that? And then we can go on and on with other things, but you get the point. If we truly believe our Christian faith, then we need to vote for leaders who espouse Christian principles, Judeo-Christian principles and ideas, and those who actually take action to do those things. Now, no one is perfect. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. There's no perfect politician. No one that we can elect that is perfect. We're all sinners. But are we going to choose people who work and strive for righteousness and godliness and to bring that to America, or people who are just the opposite? They're working against our country, want to tear it down and destroy everything godly and good about it.
Just two very short questions for you, Gary. The first one is
Sure.
Joe Biden himself. He's embroiled in this scandal regarding his son and corruption with a Ukrainian utility firm, and also Kamala Harris, his vice president, particularly knowing what President Trump announced only a few hours ago. And that was that Joe Biden would only last 3 weeks in office and then Kamala Harris would take over. And he described her as she said, she makes Bernie Sanders look like a conservative. And we know he's very far left wing. What are the great dangers of the American people thinking they're electing Joe Biden, but end up getting Kamala Harris, one of the most liberal senators in the Senate?
Well, there's a satire commercial that is out right now that I've seen that little children go knocking on the door for Halloween trick or treat, and they say trick or treat, and they hand out some candy, and then there's somebody in a Joe Biden mask coming to the door, and he goes, "Oh, it's Creepy Joe," and the wife says, "Oh, it's just Joe, don't worry about it," and he goes, "You look familiar," and then the person takes off the mask, and there's Kamala Harris, and she takes all the candy and leaves them with nothing. And that's basically what many conservatives are arguing, and the president, that look, you're not really going to get Joe. Even if Joe lasts and survives the presidency a full term, Kamala Harris will be there, and people like Bernie Sanders pulling the strings. And Joe says, no, he's the Democratic Party, but they argue that, no, look, he's going to cave to them once he gets into office. He'll talk a good game, but then he'll cave. And one of the major concerns, of course, has to do with this Green New Deal that will cost the United States trillions and trillions of dollars to implement. And part of that is what Joe Biden said about phasing out fossil fuels. Well, they don't stop to think, look, you can't just implement have electric cars everywhere. Where do you get the electricity from? How do we generate electricity? It's from power plants, and many of them are dependent on oil and coal. And then you also have oil-made products. The tires on a car are made with oil. And think about other products that we use throughout our society. It's not just a simple transition. It would cost thousands and thousands of jobs, cost our economy much money, and the president argues we'd go into a depression if Kamala Harris and Joe Biden are elected. And it definitely, if you raise taxes, it will go up, and he's pledged to do that.
Finally, Gary, how can our viewers watch the US presidential elections, and will CBN be covering the US presidential election as the votes come in?
Yes, we'll be here all evening. We'll be covering it live on the CBN News channel. You can go to cbnnews.com and watch it there, or you can download our CBN News channel app and watch it on an app. But yes, we'll be covering it. We're not going anywhere. We're right here for you. We're going to be covering it from the time the polls close up until we get some results. So sure. Tune in, watch, even from the UK.
Excellent. So I'll be looking forward to that. And Gary, thank you so much for joining us on Behind the Headlines tonight. You did a great job, and just want to encourage our viewers to watch Gary's program. Pray. Pray
for our country.
Amen.
It's a crucial time right now.
We will be praying, and also fasting as well, because it's so important and so vital, not only for America, but also the entire Western world. Thank you, Gary. Stephen, we had a real pleasure having Gary on the via video link from the United States. And, one thing you get an understanding for is that it's a completely different picture Gary presents of what's happening in America than the coverage that we are receiving here in England. And the great danger is, I think, they're coming out that if Joe Biden does win the presidency, he could only be there a very short time. And then we have a very ultra-liberal humanist in Kamala Harris, who's ready and waiting in the wings to take over the presidency. What do you think would happen if Trump wins the election? And how would the Democrats and those supporters of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris react?
If Trump wins, and my own assessment of it is when he wins, it's just a question of how big a margin that is. I think, generally speaking, when you look at polls and the polls that the media portray, usually those polls are wrong because they're trying to force through a position and sway votes in that interim process. But the resulting consequence of it, whichever way it goes, America is going to have upheaval. there are already people rioting over this, and the vote hasn't even taken place yet on the 3rd. So we're hearing stories of what's going on in Philadelphia. I spoke to somebody from New York yesterday, and they said they saw with their own eyes violence, pro-Trump Jews being attacked in New York for their position. Now that is very, very serious when you look upon America as being the land of the free.
Absolutely.
That these, if you hold an opinion that certain groups of society don't like, historically that you're entitled to have an alternative opinion, but it seems that kind of thought process is being suppressed or being pushed into a corner in one sense, and we're seeing that not just there but across the world. If you have a differing opinion, your opinion doesn't matter. It's bizarre, the humanistic agenda that we're seeing being outworked.
Absolutely. I'm just going to read out quite a few emails now. This is from Gillian, who writes, great program, Simon. Yes, it's true that our media is biased, and did some research and found Sky was taken over by an American Democrat billionaire called Roberts. Didn't know that. We have seen a very biased view and liberal policies now throughout Sky Sports too. Yeah, I've seen that as well, as a fan of Sky Sports. This one says, was Kamala Harris born in the United States? Shalom Dori. I'm not sure about that one. I think she was. This one says...
Just to clarify for that, it was her parents were pending their visa status when she was born on US soil. Yeah. So there was some that Trump raised, just as one of his offhand comments that that's where that comes from.
And yeah, this is a good email. This one is from John, who writes, Christians had better wake up. When America sneezes, everyone gets a cold. This is a worldwide issue, Judeo-Christian against globalist Marxists. God will give the president we deserve. God bless. I hope he doesn't. This one says, quite an interesting program. Trump is hated by the left-wing media, but God will bring him back because he's doing a great job in defending Israel. So thank you for that one. Someone else says, I will bless them that bless thee. And I'll read a bit going on about Genesis 12. And I think, you've done loads of films on that one, so you're very familiar with that one. Going to end the programme with that as well.
Tune into the Middle East Report on Friday for that one.
Exactly. Stephen, I mean, what was interesting in terms of what Gary Lane said, that Kamala Harris advocates this new green, let me get this right, Green New Deal. Now, this is nothing new. We've heard the Green New Deal mentioned in the World Economic Forum's plan for global reset, which seems, and this is what I think is so important in this election, you have the Republicans under President Trump that are standing on biblical values and a recognition that God is sovereign over the affairs of men and that above the president is God. You compare that to the Democrats, who are ultra secular extremists, in a sense that it's all about humanity, it's all about human effort, and come under that spirit of Babel, under the spirit of Babel. And the great danger is that they will then usher in this globalist agenda, and which ultimately is against biblical values. So, what would happen to the world if Joe Biden and Kamala Harris won the presidency?
Well, the agenda of the global reset, if you haven't done research on that, then you need to have a look at it. Klaus Schwab, the World Economic Forum, and what they intend to do is very, very important for us to really take hold of. It's out in the open. You literally just need to type in World Economic Forum, Global Reset, Klaus Schwab, and what he's seeking to do, and how the climate agenda is being used and utilised for that process as well. And what we see with this is a greater and greater imposition of more and more legislation. It's no wonder that Trump pulled himself out of the Paris Climate Accords back in 2019, because he saw actually where it was going. And he said, I'm not wasting my money on that. It's crazy. The irony of saying, oh, actually, you have to use green energy in order to meet the tariff requirements. And yet what made the free world, it was access to fuel, access to energy sources that enabled it to prosper in the Industrial Revolution, coal, gas, oil. And this scenario that we see actually goes back, you just mentioned Babel. In the story of the Tower of Babel, there is a little substance known as bitumen that is described as being the mortar that holds the building blocks together. Well, what's bitumen? It's a derivative of oil. And so what we have right there in the Tower of Babel account is actually the thing that holds nations together is their fuel source. And then the word Bavel very simply means confusion in Hebrew. So we have a city built on confusion. And we're living in a day where there is confusion in the church, and therefore there's confusion outside of it. But we don't serve a God that is double-minded. We serve a God who leads us into all truth, and both of these positions cannot be right. And so, okay, well, pro-life, okay, tick, as Gary said. Where do we stand with Israel? Tick, another thing. These things are so blatantly obvious in front of us. How can there be any confusion? Forget the people. Just look at the policy. And that should be our principle as believers as well. Don't vote for the personality. Vote for the character behind the personality and what they stand fast for.
Absolutely, which is really important. But also, it's so important as well that all of us, if we care about the free world, if we care about what's happening in our world, actually fast and pray for this election that takes place on Tuesday, the 3rd of November, that we can all join in prayer. We can all pray that God's will would be done in this election, because there's no doubt about it that there is a huge spiritual battle over this election campaign. And it is not only who will actually become the leader of the United States, but essentially who will become leader of the free world and will set the agenda for the next 4 years. And if President Trump is re-elected, then I'm sure that this is God's indication to us all that he's giving us a day of execution and a day for all of us around the world to get right with God and before the dreaded and awful day of the Lord. Stephen.
Yeah, just to add into that and the need for prayer, in 1 Timothy 2, it says, I exhort, therefore, first of all, that supplications, prayers, intercessions, thanksgivings be made for all men, for kings and all that are in a high place, that we may lead a tranquil and quiet life in all godliness and gravity. This is good and acceptable in the sight of God, our Saviour, who would have all men to be saved and come to the knowledge of the truth. So here we have tied in a responsibility to first of all pray for those in leadership. Why? That we may lead a tranquil and quiet life. Who wants a tranquil and quiet life? It'd be quite nice, to have a tranquil and quiet life. But it doesn't end that. It says that, and souls may be saved. So actually, the leadership of a nation can affect the advancement of the gospel. And this is the crux of it. Is who's going to be in the White House next going to be a bastion for freedom for the church to meet and for believers to be praying for their nations and for the nations of the world? Or is it going to bring in a government that's going to actually suppress that and restrict that in ever-increasing measure? That's the bottom line.
Absolutely. So I've got a few more emails. My contribution is that Trump will have a landslide win. This is because God is faithful. He will bless those who bless Israel. And this one is from Anita, who writes, evening, Simon and Stephen. Thank you for a great show, as always. We're praying that President Trump will prevail. If he doesn't, I fear for the future of our world. I think Biden has chosen because he's too old and he seems confused. He's a puppet. If he gets Kamala Harris, will rule the roost. And she clearly stands for everything that our faith abhors. President Trump isn't perfect, but no one is. He has done so much good, which we'll never hear about, and he has Christians in key posts. We will need to pray. If President Trump loses, it'll be a catastrophe. God bless everyone at Revelation TV and the viewers. Much love, Anita. So we've got 3 minutes left of the programme. And we will introduce this new film that Stephen's been involved in called America and the Israel Effect. And that's for the Middle East Report anyway for this Friday, isn't it? But going up, why is it so important that Christians really need to fast and pray on Tuesday and pray for this election? Why is it so vital for our own Christian freedoms that we do so?
Well, for the UK, personally, we have a relationship that goes back to the Mayflower, albeit those that were leaving wanted to free themselves from the oppression within Britain at the time. But the ramifications of that tie, what happens in America affects the UK. We tend to follow suit pretty rapidly. And so I long for us to go closer to the Word of God and desire that to be the reality in America and equally here in the UK as well.
So we've got 2.5 minutes of the programme. So can you tell us a little bit more about America and the Israel Effect and why this documentary is so timely, particularly as we are days away from the US presidential election.
Yeah, well, Genesis 12:3 says, I will bless those who bless you, and him who curses you I will curse, and in you shall all the families of the earth be blessed. That's a proclamation that was made to Abraham from God, and it's quoted in Galatians. Galatians says, for Scripture, foreseeing that God would justify the Gentiles by faith, preached the gospel beforehand to Abraham, saying, in you shall all the families of the earth be blessed. So Genesis 12 was a proclamation of the gospel and the means by which it would be outworked. So has it happened? If so, where, when, why, how? Well, our latest film in the Blessing, Curse or Coincidence series, America and the Israel Effect, looks at just that. Has America's involvement in Israel's survival been something that has played out with Genesis 12:3? Has it affected presidents? Has it affected leaders? Has it affected the nation as a whole that has been the leader of the free world for the past century? What brought that about? And what were the involvements of believers in establishing and bringing about the purpose of God with regard to the Middle East and beyond?
Absolutely, and we have over, certainly when George W. Bush was president, we've seen this horrendous hatred of the United States emerge. But when we realise it's actually the United States that came to our defence during the First World War, we wouldn't have won the First World War without the American help. Again, in the Second World War, they protected us from the Cold War. And America has been that incredible, great bastion of freedom, based upon biblical values. And there is no doubt that God has used the United States of America powerfully in world history.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. The evidence is there. And the trouble with our society is we're trying to erode history from the equation. And actually, history is the testament that there's a God at work, but also of principles that cause us to thrive and survive.
Excellent. Stephen, thank you so much for being my co-host on Behind the Headlines tonight as we discuss the US presidential elections. And I want to thank you for watching this program tonight. It's essential that as Christians that we pray and we intercede for the US presidential elections that take place on Tuesday, the 3rd of November, because if we don't, we're all going to suffer because our Christian liberties are at stake, not only in the United States, but also here in Britain. So I'm going to leave you with a trailer for Stephen's new film called America and the Israel Effect. So I want to thank you for watching Behind the Headlines.
"4,000 years ago, a covenant was made that would have an enduring impact throughout history. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you, and in you shall all the families of the earth be blessed."
The Bible contains the story of the exile of the Jewish people into Babylon, and how the Persian king Cyrus ended that exile and allowed them to return to their homeland, to rebuild their temple and to establish a national life. President Harry Truman, a Southern Baptist, knew those stories and understood biblical prophecy. He was faced with the same decision as King Cyrus, to assist the Jews to return to their homeland. What would the president do?
He was a Bible reader on his own, independently. How religious a man was Truman? That can be open for a lot of debate. He was also a politician. We have to remember that part. We're not going to get around it. He knew the story and the role of Cyrus. And when the problems were coming up for 1947, what do we do for the establishment of a partition between an Arab state and a Jewish state? What were the promises of the Balfour Declaration? He considered that. What were the promises that the British had made? The decision finally came down to was his, and his alone. Remember, he was bitterly threatened by everybody. And he said, I have to do what is right. I have to do not only what is moral, I have to do what is just, I have to do what is proper, and I have to do what is biblical. Because he knew of Cyrus.
Soviet Union.
5.5 months after this historic United Nations vote in November 1947,
United States. Yes.
the State of Israel was declared on the 14th of May, 1948.
On the 14th of May 1948, Ben-Gurion proclaimed the creation of the State of Israel, and immediately after that, America was the first country, I think within 10 or 15 minutes time, that she recognized the State of Israel. I think it was thanks to Truman that we managed to overcome this period, and the recognition was given to the State of Israel.
There would be another American president who would make a dramatic intervention on Israel's behalf. He was the only president of the United States to have resigned from office, Richard Nixon.
In 6 years since the Six-Day War, Egypt and Syria try again to destroy Israel. They attacked on the most holy day of the Jewish calendar, Yom Kippur. The war caught Israel by surprise, and she was in grave danger of defeat.
We could not continue because we didn't have any armament. We lost many people, we lost many vehicles, we lost tanks and airplanes, but nevertheless what we needed was just the ammunition in order to continue the war.
As Moshe Dayan told Golda Meir, who was prime minister at the time, the third temple might fall. The third temple was the state of Israel. It could fall. Panicked calls went into the American government for help. Panicked. Henry Kissinger held them back.
Kissinger's reported response was, "Let them bleed a little." Golda Meir rang the White House at 3 o'clock in the morning and spoke directly to President Nixon and told him that Israel was in very real danger of losing the war, particularly as the Russians were rearming the Syrians and Egyptians.
Richard Nixon's mother was a Quaker, a Bible-believing Christian. And it's reported that when the Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir called him and pled with him for help, that he recalled the words of his mother when as a child she had said to him, "One day you will be able to help the Jews." After the phone call ended, Nixon summoned his cabinet.
President Nixon was livid. The bottom line, he told Kissinger, he told the Secretary of Defense, Schlesinger, he says, do whatever you have to do. Send them whatever they need. Get the stuff in the air and get them the tanks, the planes, the weaponry. Get it over there now.
After several more weeks of fighting, the Israelis were poised for a decisive victory over both the Syrians and the Egyptians.
It was the weaponry that Nixon sent that made all the difference.
It may be against world opinion, but it's one thing to stand under God in His blessing, irrespective, than to come under His curse and have the favor of people around you.
A third president of the United States, Donald Trump, would face his Cyrus moment. Would he defy his advisors and cabinet members, as had Truman and Nixon, in order to fulfill his campaign promise to declare Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and move the U.S. Embassy there?
This is a historic day.
On Wednesday, December the 6th, 2017, despite much opposition from around the globe, President Trump declared the United States Embassy would move to Jerusalem.
Jerusalem has been the capital of the Jewish people for 3,000 years.
In 1995, Congress adopted the Jerusalem Embassy Act, urging the federal government to relocate the American embassy to Jerusalem and to recognize that that city, and so importantly, is Israel's capital.
President Trump, thank you for today's historic decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. the Jewish people and the Jewish state will be forever grateful.
As our nation continues in its role as a Cyrus nation, may we see the fulfillment of God's promise in Genesis 12:3. I will bless those who bless you.